Look at the sky. On any ordinary day, you might see an airplane crossing above you. It looks small and quiet against the clouds, and most people do not stop to think about it. But there was a time not so long ago when no human being had ever achieved powered, controlled, sustained flight in a heavier-than-air machine. For thousands of years, people watched birds. They studied wings. They imagined the sky. Some drew flying machines on paper. Some built wings from wood and cloth, climbed to high places, and jumped. They fell. The dream of flying was old as human wonder itself. Then, on a cold morning in December 1903, on a windy stretch of sand in North Carolina, a machine made of wood, cloth, and wire rose into the air. It flew for 12 seconds. It traveled 120 feet, and then it landed. The men who built that machine were not famous scientists. They were not wealthy engineers. They were two brothers from Ohio who repaired bicycles. Their names were Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright. This is their story, and this is the story of the dream that finally left the ground. Chapter 1. The Ancient Dream and a Toy. For as long as human beings have existed, they have looked at birds and wondered, how do they rise? How do they turn? How do they stay in the air? In ancient Greece, people told stories about wings made from feathers and wax. In China, people built kites that floated on the wind. In the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci drew flying machines in his notebooks machines with wings that moved like a bird's. But Leonardo's flying machines remained drawings. They did not become working flying machines. The dream of controlled flight remained mostly on paper. Centuries passed. People kept dreaming, and some began to try. In the 1800s, a few brave inventors built gliders. A glider is an aircraft without an engine. It uses the shape of its wings and the movement of wind to stay in the air. One of the most important glider builders was a German engineer named Otto Lilienthal. He made more than 2,000 glider flights. He studied how wings produce lift. Lift is the upward force created when air moves across a wing. Lilienthal showed that human beings could leave the ground if they understood how air works. But in 1896, Lilienthal died in a glider crash. His work was unfinished. The dream of controlled, powered flight was still only a dream. Around this same time, in a quiet home in Dayton, Ohio, two brothers were growing up. Their names were Wilbur and Orville Wright. Their father, Milton Wright, valued education and curiosity. He brought books into the home. He encouraged his children to ask questions. And one day, when Wilbur and Orville were still young, their father brought home a small toy. It was a simple flying toy, powered by a twisted rubber band. When released, it rose into the air, spinning and climbing for a few short seconds before falling back down. It was a small moment, but it stayed with them. That toy did not make them inventors, but it made them wonder. It planted a question. How can a machine rise into the air? Years later, in 1899, Wilbur wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, asking for books and information about flight. That letter was the beginning of a serious search. The dream of flying was no longer just a childhood memory. It was becoming a project. Big dreams often begin with small objects, a toy, a question, a moment of curiosity that a child does not forget. But a dream cannot fly by itself. A dream needs hands. It needs tools. It needs a place to begin. Chapter 2. Two bicycle makers in Dayton. Before the Wright brothers built a flying machine, they built bicycles. In the 1890s, Wilbur and Orville opened a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, the Wright Cycle Company. They sold bicycles. They repaired bicycles. And eventually, they designed and built their own. This may sound like a small detail, but it matters deeply. A bicycle is a machine that must be light. It must be strong. It must be balanced. And this is the important part. A bicycle is not stable by itself. It stays upright only when the rider controls it. The rider shifts weight. The rider adjusts direction. The rider makes small corrections, moment by moment. This idea that a machine does not need to be naturally stable, but must be controlled by the person using it, became one of the most important ideas in the Wright brothers' approach to flight. Many other inventors at that time were trying to build aircraft that would be naturally stable in the air machines that could almost fly by themselves. The Wright brothers thought differently. They believed the pilot should control the aircraft, the way a cyclist controls a bicycle. This was a critical insight. Their shop also gave them practical skills. They worked with metal and wood. They understood gears, chains, wheels, and bearings. They knew how to measure precisely. They knew how to fix what broke. They knew how to build with their hands. And the shop gave them something else: money. Not a great deal of money, but enough to fund their experiments. The Wright brothers did not have wealthy investors. They did not have government support. They paid for their aviation work with the money they earned repairing and selling bicycles. Their workshop was small. The tools were simple. Grease stained the wooden floor. Wheels and spokes lined the walls. But inside that room, the brothers began reading everything they could find about flight. They studied the work of Otto Lilienthal. They exchanged letters with Octave Chanute, a respected American engineer who knew a great deal about aviation and who encouraged their research. Step by step, the brothers were preparing. Not with grand announcements, not with dramatic plans, but with reading, thinking, sketching, and building the same way they had always solved problems. Ordinary work can prepare people for extraordinary discoveries. Their small bicycle shop in Dayton was quietly becoming the starting place of something the world had never seen. Soon, the workshop would become more than a place for bicycles. It would become a place for experiments. Chapter 3: Failure, Wind, and the Search for the Truth. In 1900, the Wright brothers traveled to a remote stretch of sand on the coast of North Carolina, a place called Kill Devil Hills, near the small village of Kitty Hawk. They chose this location carefully. It had strong, steady winds. It had wide, open sand dunes. It had soft ground for landing and for crashing. And it was far from crowds. The brothers wanted space to test, fail, and try again without an audience. They brought a glider, a simple machine of wood, cloth, and wire. No engine. No propeller. Just wings, shaped to catch the air. Their first tests were disappointing. The glider did not produce as much lift as they expected. The brothers had used published data numbers from earlier researchers, including calculations based on Lilienthal's work to design their wings. But the numbers and the real results did not match. They returned in 1901 with a larger glider. Again, the results fell short. The machine flew, but not the way their calculations predicted. Something was wrong not with their design, but with the data they had trusted. This was a moment of real frustration, but it was also a turning point. Instead of giving up, the brothers asked a deeper question. What if the accepted data is not accurate enough? They went back to Dayton, and in the autumn of 1901, they did something remarkable. They built a wind tunnel. A long wooden box with a fan at one end that pushes air through it. Inside the tunnel, they placed small models of wings and measured how air moved around them. They tested more than 200 different wing shapes. They measured lift. They measured drag. Drag is the force that resists a wing's forward movement and slows it down. They recorded every result. They compared. And slowly, carefully, they built their own set of reliable data. This was not dramatic work. It was hours and days of quiet, careful, repetitive measurement. But it was the most important work they ever did. Their 1902 glider, designed using this new data, performed far better than anything they had built before. It flew predictably. It responded to the pilot. And it introduced their most important innovation, a system of 3-axis control. This meant the pilot could guide the aircraft in 3 directions, up and down, left and right, and rolling from side to side. They used a method called wing warping, gently twisting the wings to adjust the aircraft's balance in the air. With the 1902 glider, the brothers solved the problem that had stopped every earlier experimenter. They achieved controlled gliding flight without an engine. Failure became useful because they studied it honestly. They did not guess. They measured. They did not assume. They tested. And the design improved. Once they understood the problem, they could finally build the answer. But the answer was not only power, it was control. Chapter 4. The first flight was short. By late 1902, the Wright brothers had solved the hardest problem in aviation: control. Now they needed 2 more things: an engine and a propeller. They could not find an engine that was both light enough and powerful enough for their aircraft. So they built their own, with help from Charlie Taylor, a skilled mechanic who worked in their bicycle shop. The engine was made partly of aluminum to save weight. It produced about 12 horsepower, not very powerful, but light enough for the job. The propeller presented another challenge. Most people at that time thought of a propeller as a kind of spinning fan. But the Wright brothers understood something different. A propeller is really a spinning wing. It creates thrust-forward pushing force the same way a wing creates lift, by shaping the flow of air. The brothers designed their propellers using the same careful data from their wind tunnel experiments. It was patient, precise work. By the autumn of 1903, the machine was ready. They called it the Flyer. It was built from wood, fabric, and wire. It had 2 wings, one above the other. It had a small engine connected to 2 propellers by bicycle chains. And it sat on a wooden launch rail, a simple track that guided the machine forward as it began to move. They returned to Kill Devil Hills. The wind was cold. The sand stretched flat in every direction. The sky was gray. On December 14th, Wilbur made the first attempt. The Flyer left the rail but rose too steeply, stalled, and came down almost immediately. It was not a successful flight. They repaired the minor damage and waited. 3 days later, December 17th, 1903, they tried again. This time, Orville lay flat on the lower wing and took the controls. The engine started. The propellers turned. The Flyer moved along the rail, slowly at first, then faster, and then it rose from the ground. It flew for 12 seconds. It covered about 120 feet, and then it settled back onto the sand. It was not high. It was not far. It was not fast. But it was the first successful, powered, controlled, sustained flight by a heavier-than-air flying machine. This moment is widely recognized as the first successful powered, controlled, sustained flight by a heavier-than-air flying machine. They flew 3 more times that morning. The 4th and longest flight belonged to Wilbur, 852 feet in 59 seconds. A photograph was taken during the first flight. It shows the Flyer just above the sand. Orville lies on the wing. Wilbur stands nearby, watching. There is no crowd, no flags, no cheering spectators, just sand, wind, sky, and a machine barely off the ground. The first flight was short, but the dream behind it was centuries old. Shortly after the final flight, a strong gust of wind caught the flyer and tumbled it across the sand, damaging it beyond repair. The 1903 flyer never flew again, but history did not celebrate them right away. The dream had left the ground. Now they had to prove it to the world. Chapter 5. Proof, Doubt, and the Modern Sky. After December 17, 1903, you might expect the world to celebrate, but that is not what happened. The brothers sent a telegram to their father. The message was short. It reported their success. 4 flights on Thursday morning. A few newspapers printed brief reports, but many were inaccurate. Some confused the basic facts. Some did not seem to understand what had happened, and some people simply did not believe it. This is important to understand. The Wright brothers had done something historically important, but because it happened on a remote beach with almost no witnesses, and because the flights were so short, many people had doubts. Doubt is when people are not sure if something is true, even when it is. The brothers did not argue. Instead, they continued working. In 1904 and 1905, they built improved aircraft and tested them at a field called Huffman Prairie, near Dayton. Their flights became longer. Their control became sharper. By October 1905, Wilbur flew for more than 39 minutes, covering about 24 miles in a single flight. But still, the wider world paid little attention. Recognition came later. Recognition means public acceptance and respect. And for the Wright brothers, it did not arrive on the day they flew. In 1908, the brothers gave public demonstrations that could not be ignored. Wilbur flew in France, near the city of Le Mans. He flew smooth, controlled circles in front of large crowds. Europeans who had doubted the brothers were astonished. The flights were precise, confident, and undeniable. At the same time, Orville demonstrated the aircraft at Fort Myer, Virginia, for the United States Army. During one test flight, a serious crash occurred. Orville was badly injured. His passenger, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, was killed. It was a painful reminder that flight remained dangerous. But the demonstrations continued, and the world began to understand what the brothers had achieved. Proof takes time. The dream became real, not in a single moment, but through years of patient work, repeated testing, and careful demonstration. The century that followed transformed the sky. Aviation, the science and practice of flying, grew rapidly. Airplanes carried passengers across continents. They carried mail across oceans. They connected cities that once seemed impossibly far apart. Air travel changed business, communication, exploration, and warfare. It changed how human beings understood distance and time. Today, thousands of flights take off around the world every day. Passengers sit in comfortable seats high above the ground. They read, they sleep, they watch movies. Most of them never think about how it all began. But it began with 2 brothers from Dayton, Ohio. 2 men who repaired bicycles, studied the wind, measured wing shapes, solved the problem of control, and flew for 12 seconds on a cold December morning. They did not change the world with luck or magic. They changed it with curiosity, patience, measurement, and proof. Final reflection. How did 2 ordinary brothers turn the dream of flying into reality? Not through wealth, not through fame, not through any single flash of brilliance. They did it by asking careful questions. by learning from the people who came before them, Lilienthal, Chanute, and centuries of dreamers who studied the sky. By testing ideas honestly, by measuring what others had only guessed, by building what no one else had built, and by refusing to stop when the answers were not yet clear. The Wright brothers did not invent the dream of flying. That dream is as old as the first person who ever looked at a bird and wondered. But Wilbur and Orville found a way to make that dream leave the ground. Progress does not always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly on a wooden rail, on a windy beach, with almost no one watching. Progress becomes history when it is tested, proved, and shared.